and have been true to their word, and I look forward to our continued engagement over the days ahead. As members will know, since the new US administration took office, my colleagues and I have been engaged in intensive discussions on an economic deal between the US and the UK. One that would not just avoid the imposition of significant tariffs, but that would deepen our economic relationship. On everything from defence, economic security, financial services, machinery, tech and regulation, there are clear synergies between the US and UK markets. And this is reflected in the fair and balanced trading relationship that already exists between our two countries. I can confirm to the House that those talks are ongoing and will remain so. It is this government's view that a deal is not just possible, it is favourable to both countries, and that this course of action serves Britain's interests as an open-facing trading nation. I've been in contact with many businesses across a broad range of sectors, including those most affected, who have very much welcomed this approach. It is clear to me that industry themselves want to grasp the opportunity a deal can offer, and they welcome this government's cool-headed approach. Madam Deputy Speaker, in increasingly insecure times, I have heard some members cling to the security of simple answers and loud voices. I understand the compulsion, but I caution members of this House to keep calm and remain clear-eyed on what is in our national interest, not to simply proclaim that we follow the actions of other countries. The British people rightly expect this government to keep our country secure at home and abroad. An unnecessary, escalating trade war would serve neither purpose. True strength comes in making the right choices at the right time. And thanks to the actions of our Prime Minister, who has restored Britain's place on the world stage, the UK is in a unique position to do a deal where we can and respond when we must. It remains our belief that the best route to economic stability for working people is a negotiated deal with the US that builds on our shared strengths. However, we do reserve the right to take any action we deem necessary if a deal is not secured. To enable the UK to have every option open to us in future, I am today launching a request for input on the implications for British businesses of possible retaliatory action. This is a formal step necessary for us to keep all options on the table. We will seek the views of UK stakeholders over 4 weeks until the 1st of May 2025 on products that could potentially be included in any UK tariff response. This exercise will also give businesses the chance to have their say and influence the design of any possible UK action. If we are in a position to agree an economic deal with the US that lifts the tariffs that have been placed on our industries, this request for input will be paused, and any measures flowing from that will be lifted. Further information on the request for input will be published on gov.uk later today, alongside an indicative list of potential products that the government considers most appropriate for inclusion. I know this will be an anxious time for all businesses, not just those with direct trade links to America. And let me say very clearly that we stand ready to support businesses through this. That starts by making sure they have reliable information. And any business which is concerned about what these changes mean for them can find clear guidance and support on great.gov.uk, where there is now a bespoke web page. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government was elected to bring security back to working people's lives. And at a time of volatility, businesses and workers alike are looking to the government to keep our heads, to act in our national interest, and to navigate Britain through this period. And while some urge escalation, I simply will not play politics with people's jobs. This government will strive for a deal that supports our industries and the well-paid jobs that come with them, while preparing our trade defences and keeping all options on the table. It is the right approach to defend the UK's domestic industries from the direct and indirect impacts of US tariffs in a way which is both measured and proportionate, while respecting the rules-based international trading system. As the world continues to change around us, British workers and businesses can be assured of one constant, and that this is a government that will not be set off course in choppy waters. So the final part of our approach will be to turbo boost the work this government is doing to make our economy stronger and more secure, including our new industrial strategy. And we will strike trade deals with our partners and work closely with our allies for our shared prosperity. We have a clear destination to deliver that economic security for working people. We're progressing a deal that can do that. We're laying the foundations to move quickly, should it not. And we're ensuring British business have a clear voice in what happens next. And I commend this statement to the House.
For the Shadow Secretary of State, Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Businesses, workers and their families woke up this morning with greater fear and more uncertainty about their future. Tariffs makes us all poorer by pushing up costs, suppressing demand and making the pound in our pocket buy less of the things that we need. It's free trade to which we owe our past prosperity, and free trade which has lifted billions out of poverty since the Second World War. So this is a moment for calm words and cool heads, and we will support the government when it does sensible things to reverse the impact on our already fragile economy. I'm glad the government has recommitted to reaching a deal with our closest ally and largest single country trading partner. But this is also a moment for honesty and telling the truth. The government sadly got no special favours from the White House last night. The Secretary of State refers to vindication. This is no vindication at all. We're in precisely the same band as the Congo, Costa Rica, Kosovo and the Christmas Islands. In fact, I count over 125 countries and territories that have the same tariff levels as the US as we now do. So not that special. Our automotive manufacturers face unchanged tariffs of 25% on around £8 billion worth of cars and auto part exports. Steel and aluminium exports remain at 25%. And on a volume-weighted basis, our exports face an average tariff of closer to 13%. Above all, last night was a vindication of those who were pilloried and abused for wanting our country to have the freedom to decide our own trade policy. If Labour and the Liberal Democrats had their way, we'd still be in the EU. As the Prime Minister acknowledged this morning, thousands of British jobs have been saved today as the result. And I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues had the decency to regret the 48 times they voted to stay in Europe and to thank us for getting Brexit done. Madam Deputy Speaker, last week, the OBR warned that these tariffs could knock up to 1% off GDP. We're already in a per capita recession and markets are falling this morning. It's businesses that create jobs and grow our economy. Yet at every turn, the government has piled on headwinds when they need our support. They've put a tax on jobs, more than doubled business rates for many, introduced the family business death tax and are barrelling ahead with flawed recycling charges. No wonder business confidence remains at rock bottom. To help British exporters survive, they must urgently tackle our sky-high energy costs. A business in Birmingham, the West Midlands, faces energy costs 4 times their competitor in Birmingham, Alabama, in the US. That dwarfs the impact of tariffs and is no basis on which to compete. The Secretary of State himself is responsible for the Employment Rights Bill. It'll hit businesses so hard, the OBR has not even begun to assess how much it will hurt the economy. So now is the time, today is the day. In the national interest, the Secretary of State must walk back to his department and instruct his officials, shelve the Employment Rights Bill today. Put ideology aside, put the unions on hold and put the government on the side of British business. The cost of failure is too high. The burdens on business are too great. Time is too precious. He must act and act fast. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me conclude with some questions to the Secretary of State on behalf of all of our constituents. Will he publish an urgent assessment of the impact of today's tariffs on the UK economy so markets can see whether the Chancellor's emergency budget sums still add up or she'll be back for more taxes? When will he give the car makers the clarity they need on the ZEV mandate? Will he undertake to keep Parliament informed and to publish the UK's broader objectives, not negotiating strategy, but the broader objectives in these trade negotiations with the US, precisely as the previous government did in March 2020? Will he assure us that any deal will back British farmers and food producers and uphold our high environmental protection and the animal welfare standards which we ourselves enhanced since leaving the EU and upheld in the agreements we reached? Will he now surge additional resources for exporters, reallocating resources across government to fund a new version of the UK trade show programme and enlarging the Great Campaign? What consideration is the government giving to the special situation of Northern Ireland? Will he guarantee that all claims under the duty reimbursement scheme for Northern Ireland will be paid promptly and the government will commit additional resources when required? Can he reassure us that in the event the UK did see a major trade distortion in Northern Ireland, the government would be prepared, if necessary, to trigger Article 16 of the Windsor Framework? Will he reassure the House that any concessions to UK tech giants on the digital services tax won't simply shift the burden to the United Kingdom small businesses? Madam Deputy Speaker, on this side of the House, we are on the side of business and on the side of Britain. We understand the gravity of this situation. We will support the government where it acts in the national interests. I hope they will take this moment seriously, get back round the table with their US counterparts and involve the House in their deliberations.
Secretary of State Jonathan Reynolds.
Well, I thank the Shadow Minister for his statement and his tone in responding, and I recognise that his commitment to free trade and the case he has made for that, which I believe is one that we broadly share. He asks for honesty. I think that is always good in Parliament. He's a little bit flippant about the position that we find ourselves in today. He mentions a series of countries, Christmas Islands, Kosovo, who don't have the kind of complex trading relationships we have with the United States. I would just say to him, you can see in my tone and my presentation and my words today, there is disappointment from me that we are in this position, but I do look at the EU, which faces a tariff of 20%, Japan 24%, India 26%. I look at the 25% tariffs already in place, and Canada and Mexico. So yes, we're in a more favourable position compared to those key friends and allies, but we must go further, particularly in relation to the tariffs on automotive, which is a particular concern for me. He brings up Brexit again. I would say perhaps not the finest hour in terms of the state's preparation for large trade shocks in the Conservative Party, but let's pass that over. Of course, as the President of the Board of Trade, I am of the view that it's good that we can set our own trade policy. But I would just say to him, and I would mean this to all colleagues, isn't it time to try and unite the country about the future, rather than always harbour back to the past? Isn't that the way we will all find our way through that? And I just think, look, half the country voted one way, half the other way. Let's build that together, and please, let's look to the future. That is the right way forward. I would also say, and this is a very important point, it is not a choice. It is a false choice to see this as being presented as between working with the US or the EU. We can do this in a way that is consistent with both, and we should all be committed to that. He asks about the implications for the United Kingdom. He broadly asked me to reverse a series of policy choices made in the last 14 years, and I'll go through all of those. I would say in relation to the spring statement, the Chancellor not only rebuilt the headroom caused by some of this global turbulence to a substantial degree higher than that which was bequeathed to her by the Conservative Party. I'd also say, on Conservative spending plans, there was no relief for business rates whatsoever in what we were left. That was a one-year relief rolled over that never had any longevity from the Conservative Party. And I haven't yet received any credible proposals from the party opposite to pay for their spending plans, but I'm always available to receive those in writing, Madam Deputy Speaker. He asks for reassurance. Of course, we're always happy to provide that on policy changes domestically. He knows we're more pragmatic in our approach on things like the ZEV mandate for the automotive sector than the Conservative Party was in office. He knows the Department of Transport leads on that policy, but the Publication of our response to the consultation for potential changes will be published soon. I won't comment on the details of any negotiations with the US. I think colleagues would expect that, but our SPS system, our commitment to that for food standards and food safety in the UK was a manifesto commitment, and of course we will adhere to that on this side of the House. I think he also knows we are imminently preparing to publish our trade strategy, which covers a lot of the issues, particularly around support for exporters, that we want to proceed with. On Northern Ireland, I will just spend a moment on this because this is an incredibly important issue for all colleagues. Of course, the potential for a differential response from the European Union to ourselves could lead to a difficult situation in Northern Ireland. The duty reimbursement scheme that he highlights is the key policy here, because goods entering Northern Ireland from the US, which are not going into the wider single market, are then subject to the reimbursement programme. We do have to make sure that works well. I absolutely recognise the points he has made on that, and I will continue to update the House and all colleagues with our work in this area. I recognise how important it is, how relevant it is to all of our constituents, and of course we'll endeavour to keep all colleagues updated on progress.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Workers at BMW Cowley are deeply concerned by recent news. BMW is right. A trade war would have no benefits, and the Secretary of State is right to engage calmly with his US counterparts. But can I ask what discussions he's had with his EU counterparts, given how integrated our automotive sector is with that in EU countries?
My honourable friend, very much for her question. She is absolutely right that in some of our iconic automotive manufacturing brands, BMW, JLR, Aston Martin, who are a particular success in the US market and therefore exposure to this. There is within government very close cooperation between the teams that are working on our EU reset and our trade negotiations in this area. So I can assure her of the alignment, of the continuity and consistency of policy in that area, as well as the changes to, for instance, like domestic policies like the ZEV mandate. She will know in the budget there was significant money for incentivising, for instance, the rollout of infrastructure for electric vehicles, £2 billion put aside for the wider joint collaboration and R&D initiatives with the automotive sector. So this remains a clear and consistent government priority, and again I'll keep her updated with the particular constituency interest that she has.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Business Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Donald Trump has launched a destructive trade war that threatens the jobs and living standards of people across the UK and around the world. And let's be clear, this is not about reciprocity or a level playing field. The US is conflating our high British standards with trade barriers, and they're doing it on purpose. This is Donald Trump saying to the UK that he'll only lower tariffs if we lower standards. He's saying, sell out your NHS to US vulture firms or else. Sell out your farmers to US big business or else. And give up protections against online scammers and for children's safety to US tech barons or else. If the government gives in to Trump's threats, it will only encourage him to use the same bullying tactics again and again. It is simultaneously true that the way that the White House has made its crude calculation actually makes Britain's negotiation position a bit better than other countries, and we genuinely welcome that. That is a relief to us all. But, and I say this with regret, there is no sign that the government's lobbying has borne any fruit, given that we have been put on the same regime as a number of other countries, such as Honduras, Peru, Guatemala, and others. This must be a wake-up call. We Liberal Democrats believe that we must end this trade war as quickly as possible, and that means standing firm with our allies against Trump's attempts to divide and rule. So will the government take urgent steps to bring our Commonwealth and European partners together in an economic coalition of the willing against Trump's tariffs? We welcome this 1 month of consultation with business. Will the government confirm it will look at energy costs and business rates reform as part of that 4-week consultation, especially with the car industry? And at the same time, will that 4-week consultation be run in parallel with talks with our allies to draw up the use of retaliatory tariffs in a coordinated way? When does the government expect to publish an impact assessment of these tariffs on our small businesses, jobs and the cost of living? Will the government look seriously at launching talks with the EU to create a bespoke customs union? And let us be clear, the UK would not be in a worse worse place if the government had heeded our calls to negotiate a customs union. Even the Conservative Party should be able to see that Turkey has been in a customs union with the EU since 1995, and they have likewise been hit only with 10% tariffs. Yeah. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, will the government rule out once and for all that they will not water down the digital services tax or our digital competition regulations to appease Trump's billionaire backers?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for her questions and her submission. I'm pleased to hear she feels we need to end any potential trade war. I'm pretty certain I heard her on the media last week demanding that we escalate that trade war, and I don't think that is in any of our interests or the route and direction that we need to go in. She mentions there's no sign of the UK being treated in any different way. She will know the US have a view of VAT that we do not share, and they compare that to their sales tax. And our rate of VAT, look at the comparable treatment to the European Union, there is a differential there. It's one that doesn't satisfy me, because I believe we could seriously get to a position where we're not only avoiding the imposition of additional trade tariffs and barriers, we could be deepening our trade relationship and removing some of the barriers that already exist, particularly in trade in services. So that is the objective of the government. And of course we work very closely with a whole range of friends and allies. But when they go into any negotiation, they're representing their own national or customs union interest, and we do the same. I wouldn't expect any country to go into a negotiation trying to represent the UK. They will have their own interests, and what I do is simply the same for the United Kingdom. I've got to put our own interests first, and there is a different structure to our trading relationship between the US and the UK. The US, for instance, does not have a large deficit in traded goods that they have with the EU or with China. So it's a different level of conversation, and it allows us to put our own interests first. And that is all we are seeking to do with the government in our policy towards the US. She mentions a range of other issues which I identify. I think colleagues know I have very strong views on the very large increases in industrial energy costs which occurred after 2010, almost a 50% increase in real terms. And I do think they need to be addressed. The industrial strategy and other initiatives from government are the wider policy objectives and tools that we have around this. It's much more in terms of the consultation and the call for input what we have called for in relation to this, the formal steps that we need to do to take the impact from business themselves and their chance to put their views forward as part of it that I have announced today, which, as I say, would not be necessary if we can come to an agreement. I believe all members of the House would want to see us do that. I believe this relationship can be deepened. It doesn't come at a cost to other key trading relationships if we get it right, such as the one between ourselves and the European Union. So that is the objective of the government, and I welcome any support from all sides of the House in fulfilling that objective.
Callum Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement. The dramatic shift in US trade policy yesterday marks an historic abdication from the principles of open commerce and global trade that has underpinned the economies of the Western world since the end of the Second World War. Tariffs bring no winners, only losers, in the form of higher costs for consumers and higher barriers to business and industry. Can the Secretary of State set out how this government is working with international institutions such as the World Trade Organization to prevent further escalation and position the UK as a leading champion for open markets?
Well, I warmly welcome the question from my honourable friend. He is right to say this is a substantial change in US policy. I think it's important that even if we do not agree with some of the decisions and the thinking that underpins that we recognise where that comes from, and indeed this was part of the US presidential campaign. So we've been able to prepare the ground for these conversations. He asked a specific question about international cooperation. We are strongly involved with the WTO, and particularly supported the re-election of Dr. Ngozi as the Director General. It's important to remember that despite the problems the multilateral system faces, it is still the basis upon which the vast majority of trade around the world takes place, and will continue to play a very constructive role in relation to the WTO and any multilateral organisation which serves our own interests to do so as well.
Barclay.
What was missing from the Secretary of State's statement, and indeed his reply to both opposition front benches, is the government's estimate of the cost of these tariffs, particularly in the context of the Chancellor's fiscal headroom. Could he now update the House on that specifically?
For his question, he will know as a former Treasury Minister the kind of work that goes on to make sure those assessments are made. The announcement was made late last night. We had the chance to respond yesterday evening and this morning to it, he will also appreciate that the impact on the UK is not just about the direct relationship between the US and the UK, but what happens in the wider global trading system. How other countries choose to react to the announcements in the US will be the determining factor for the impact upon the UK, and we will not know that at this stage. But I promise him I will keep the House updated, and him personally if he wishes, at any stage as to our work to assess what the impact will be on the UK. But also that I believe for all members of Parliament this should be a time for reassurance, for calm heads, for clear information to British business as to how we will navigate these difficult times. I think that is the correct message to be sending out from Parliament.
Della Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suspect that the opposition front bench, if they're still trying to propagate the arguments of 2016, are a bit drunk on chlorinated chicken. We need to get real. Celebrating a tariff of 10% rather than 20% is like celebrating that when you got mugged, they only took your wallet and not your watch as well. That's why the British public deserve better. That's why I'm grateful that the Secretary of State is talking about our relationship with Europe, because who knows what President Trump will bring next week. We do 5 times more business with the European Union than we do with America. It is in our interest to have a close and stable trading relationship with Europe, but right now that is up for grabs too. So could the Secretary of State just set out for us what this now means for his negotiations on the European reset and the summit in May?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her question. I would just be clear again, no one is celebrating the position we find ourselves in as a country this morning. No one is celebrating that. We recognise the differential that the UK finds itself in, but all of us, I believe all of us on all sides of the House, are disappointed by the announcements from the United States and are seeking to provide a way through that. I reiterate to her, I know she feels very strongly about this, this is not a choice between the US and the EU. It doesn't have to be. These are two key and long-term and important trading partners, and actually security and defence partners as well. The EU summit that she mentions next month is a key event. Our aspirations for an ambitious EU reset on a trade basis to rectify some of the flaws in the agreement agreed under the previous government remain. Our objectives there are clear, and they were all in the manifesto that we on this side of the House stood on and won the election. So that remains a key priority, and again I share with her the alignment between the EU reset and this negotiation is very strong within government.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Business Secretary delayed and dithered for 5 months before meeting his US counterparts. And that dereliction of duty, his refusal to meet earlier, is a price that working people and businesses in the UK are now paying. So does he regret his refusal to meet his US counterparts earlier?
The Honourable Lady is incorrect, and I've got to ask her to take a bit more of a serious tone with the questions that she brings to board. This is really serious stuff. I've met my counterparts on many, many occasions. We were in contact even before some of the formal procedures on the US side that they were confirmed. So it wasn't technically even in any way possible to be in touch with them sooner. Their engagement has been consistent and serious. The Honourable Lady is incorrect, and please approach these very important proceedings with a little bit more seriousness.
Ben Esterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The impact of the US tariffs has very serious implications for UK industry. It's a reminder of the importance of the industrial strategy and of support from government, including for domestic steelmaking capability, something the party opposite, sadly, over 14 years, very badly neglected. So can my right honourable friend confirm that he is fully committed to the plan for steel and the importance of our sovereign steelmaking capacity?
Grateful to my honourable friend for his question and the work he and I did together over many years in opposition in this area. He knows the commitment of this government and this side of the House to the steel industry. It is, of all the issues of industrial neglect, we were bequeathed some of the harder issues to resolve. There is no doubt about that. Whether it is the future of British Steel at Scunthorpe and Teesside, or our aspirations under the steel strategy for new investments, new technology in terms of that sovereign capability. He knows the ambition on this side of the House is very strong. The issues are difficult, particularly difficult, I should say, this week, and I know all the workers at Scunthorpe are particularly concerned about that. But the commitment and the work of this government to the steel sector will go on.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Minister offer us any guarantee that the Government will not enter into a trade deal with America that will allow for the importation and sale in this country of food products that are produced to a lower environmental and animal welfare standard than those that we demand of United Kingdom farmers?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his question. He knows I won't go into the detail of any negotiation, but as I said to the opposition front bench, he knows our commitment, our manifesto commitment to our SPS regime, and that is a very important commitment on this side of the House, affecting all of our trade negotiations, not just this one.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I start by welcoming the Secretary of State's statement this morning. The Port of Felixstowe is the UK's busiest container shipping port in the UK. Though we import more than we export, we are also the 9th largest exporter in the UK, and the USA market is important for our local and national trading market. Last night's news will likely have a significant impact on the global trading markets, and it's not an exaggeration to say it could potentially change the global trading consensus of the last 80 years. Just as President Trump is acting in what he believes is his national interest, can the Secretary of State reassure me and my constituents in Felixstowe and across my constituency of Suffolk Coastal that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister will act firmly in our national interest and do whatever is necessary to protect British jobs, British trade and industry and British consumers?
Well, she is right to talk about the significance of the decision and announcements last night, the historical scale of that, and particularly for her constituents and economic infrastructure so vital to the country, what that means to process the scale of some of those changes. But yes, I can assure her, whether it is myself as the Secretary of State, that the Prime Minister, all members of the Cabinet, and the decisions we've had to make at pace in order to get us to the position to put our own national interest forward in a way that's allowed us to progress some of these negotiations and keep open opportunities for the future. I can tell her we'll be doing that at all times.
Reynolds Objecting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For all the carefully choreographed bonhomie in the Oval Office last November, the Prime Minister has failed to subsequently secure a US military backstop for his coalition, and now, despite Number 10 briefing out a narrative about productive discussions at the weekend, the Prime Minister admitted to business leaders earlier that clearly there will be an economic impact from the decisions the US has taken. On Times Radio this morning, the Business Secretary said he would roll up his sleeves to try to remove the impact on businesses entirely. That's a bold claim to make, given the circumstances. So the impact the Chancellor's budget is already having. What time frame does he envisage an economic deal with the US, and what is he doing until the 1st of May whilst waiting for the views of UK shareholders?
Well, I thank him for his question. He will have heard this morning, myself on the media and here in Parliament, being very clear about how we feel about these decisions, which are that we are deeply disappointed that no country has been able to secure an exemption from them, but we remain committed to the kind of work we've been working very hard on to deliver the opportunities, deliver the potential way as a way through this. And he asks specific questions about how we will respond to this. Well, the content of my statement, respectfully, in terms of how we will ask British businesses to begin to work with us on the formal steps necessary in order to do that. And on the time frame, I shadowed a lot of business secretaries, Conservative business secretaries, over the last few years. There was a fairly rapid turnover at one point, and some of them gave all kinds of timeframes and commitments on trade deals. That's not in our interests because, of course, it puts pressure on you in your negotiations. A lot of this will be held on the US side in terms of the timescales they want to engage upon. But I can tell them I believe there is no country in the world further advanced in the talks that they're having with the United States, and there is hope and optimism that comes from that.
Chi Anwara, who will be followed by Steve Darling. Chi Anwara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The US is our closest ally, the world's largest economy, as well as being the UK's greatest source of foreign direct investment. So I welcome my right honourable friend's calm and pragmatic approach, as well as his determination not to abandon British workers' rights in the face of these tariffs, as urged by the Conservatives, but rather to focus on the trade talks. And on those talks, could he confirm whether the Online Safety Act, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act, and/or the digital sales tax are part of those talks? And could you also say a little bit more about his counter-argument to the Trump administration's view that VAT and the DST represent tariffs rather than tax?
I thank her for her question. She reminds me I didn't get a chance to respond to the opposition front bench, but I do feel if we came to Parliament today following these announcements in the United States and said, "Do you know what the answer to this is? That low-paid people aren't going to get the sick pay they're otherwise going to get under this Labour government," I think that would be the wrong response to the kind of announcements that we have seen. And again, as ever, it would be scapegoating the wrong people for difficult things that have nothing to do with their own position in the UK economy. My honourable friend asks a number of questions very skillfully in terms of how many she leveraged into that question. Look, there are real differences of opinion between ourselves and the United States on something like VAT. We would say that it applies, and it does apply, to domestically produced goods as much as goods that come into the UK, and that is not trade distorting, and indeed the relationship, the balance of trade between the US and the UK is evidence of that. The argument from the US is slightly different. I will not go into the content of all of the negotiations, and she will appreciate that, but success in any negotiation is recognising the other side's argument, putting your own forward, but being willing to get round the table and do that. And that is the approach of this government. That is the way forward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we must stand up to this bully that is Trump and support British business. This morning, I reached out to a manufacturer in Torbay, Gooch and Housego, who manufacture high fibre optics that help facilitate international communications. They have interests in manufacturing in the US, the UK, Europe and Thailand. It is now an extremely complex world that they have to navigate, and other players in the high-tech sector. How does the Minister plan to help the high-tech sector navigate this challenging world we now live in?
Well, I thank him for his question. I would say our job is to defend the UK national interest, and the kind of company that he has described in his constituency in Torbay, which sounds like a fantastic company, again an example of why I want businesses based in the UK, because they can then access a whole range of markets from the best possible position. It is exactly the kind of company that will have, because of those complex supply chains, questions about what this means for them. And the decision to launch bespoke information on great.gov.uk today to coincide with this announcement is precisely our attempt to provide them with the assurance that they need. I'd also say a business like that can genuinely help us through this difficult period, because whatever colleagues, members think of the President and his agenda, it is based on returning a certain type of good quality manufacturing job to the United States. And actually, British firms and British business in many cases already provide those, and they will provide more if we find our way through these trade tensions and the imposition of tariffs, so they can work with us on the solution to these problems. I'm grateful to them for putting that company forward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really pleased to hear the Secretary of State's commitment to steel. Stocksbridge Speciality Steels in my constituency is a strategically significant site with world-class unique capability for creating specialist parts, which will be essential in increasing our defence capacity and net zero infrastructure. Last week, I held a community listening event on the government's excellent steel strategy. The message was clear: let's ensure British-made steel is best. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that today's news further demonstrates why it is so important that this government is committed to a £2.5 billion plan for steel?
I'm grateful to her and for her advocacy for steel as well, which I greatly appreciate. She puts the case extremely well, which is the kind of products that we're making in the UK in the steel sector, and which in the main where we export them to the US are niche, they're high value, they're in critical sectors like defence and the manufacturing supply chain. They're complementary to the US. It's a good case of why I believe there are no argument for the imposition of tariffs in this sector, because our steel sector is complementary to the US, whether that's in defence or the manufacturing supply chain. So that's the basis upon which I think we could find a way through this. And she's right to say the level of domestic support has increased considerably through the steel strategy and the £2.5 billion, £3 billion in total, including Port Talbot, that we put forward as this government. It's very, very important to us that we deal and support the foundation industries. The steel strategy is a clear example of that.
The steel constituency, Matt Vickers. Martin,
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Dealing with the erratic Trump administration must be something of a nightmare for negotiations, but the unexpected can always emerge from the White House. But the one certain
Good afternoon. And Bálamar dúspáda fáiltí file a chuir roimh Commissioner McGrath, Arash, goodí Fergnamh an rialtas in Éireann agus go gáir agus éanamh leis a sochtain méad atá buinte amach ag godíise agus a méad ibar tá dhéanamh ag son Comisiún. I'm delighted to welcome Commissioner McGrath back to government buildings on his first official visit as European Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection. This is a very important and substantial portfolio with direct impacts on the lives of hundreds of millions of European Union citizens. I know that Michael will bring his excellent judgment, deep commitment to public service and personal integrity to the role. Today we had the opportunity to discuss some of the policy areas within the Commissioner's portfolio, including strengthening the monitoring of the rule of law within the European Union. The programme for government includes strong commitments on this issue, which is of fundamental importance to all of us. I welcome the launch this week of the Commission's public consultation on a European Democracy Shield. The Shield will play a vital component of the strategic framework to build up Europe's societal resilience and increase trust in democracy. We discussed economic issues and the importance of the European Union's single market as the foundation of Europe and Ireland's economic competitiveness. President von der Leyen has asked Commissioner McGrath to examine the scope to introduce a 28th regime to a new legal status aimed at breaking down barriers for entrepreneurs setting up companies in the European Union. Commissioner McGrath has been entrusted with leading work on consumer protection, looking at how to ensure consumers do not face unfair discrimination and are protected when buying goods or services across borders. We also, of course, discussed the decisions announced by President Trump last night. Ireland believes in open and free trade and that the imposition of tariffs is bad for the world economy. I deeply regret the United States' decision to impose 20% tariffs on imports from across the European Union. We see no justification for this. More than $4.2 billion worth of goods and services are traded between the European Union and the US daily. Disrupting this deeply integrated relationship with tariffs and increased protectionism benefits no one. Tariffs drive inflation, hurting people on both sides of the Atlantic, and they put jobs at risk. We will now reflect with our European Union partners on how best to respond. It is important that our response is considered and measured. Any action should be proportionate, aimed at defending the interests of our businesses, workers and citizens. Now is a time for dialogue, and I believe that a negotiated way forward is the only sensible one. A confrontation is in no one's interests. Ireland will be a strong advocate for a constructive solution which enhances the existing and strong transatlantic trading relationship. As a small open economy and as a country that has built our prosperity on a policy of free and fair trade, there is no doubt that the imposition of tariffs by the US will have an adverse impact. Ireland's priority is the protection of jobs and our economy. We are starting from a position of strength and our economy is resilient. It is important that we focus on factors that we can control, including improving our competitiveness and investing in infrastructure. By working with Irish-owned companies, with multinationals based here, with our European Union partners and bilaterally with the United States, we can and will weather this storm. Thank you very much indeed. And over to you, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Taoiseach. It's great to be here in the courtyard of government buildings and wonderful to have an opportunity to return here and to congratulate you in person in your office on your election as Taoiseach a number of weeks ago. This is a mission that we had been planning for a number of weeks, focused on files in the area of justice, consumer protection and democracy. And I want to acknowledge and thank the Irish Government, the Taoiseach, Taoiseach, ministers and the state bodies for their support for the work of the European Commission across these important areas. Over the next couple of days I will have a series of engagements with the Attorney General, with the DPP, with the Garda Commissioner, with the Chief Justice. I was delighted to meet the Taoiseach today. I've met with Minister Donoghue and look forward to meeting the Taoiseach, Minister Chambers and Minister Jim O'Callaghan as well over the next couple of days. I had a very good meeting this morning with the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission to hear about the very good work that they are doing to protect Irish consumers and also to uphold EU product safety standards through the different networks of cooperation that we have at an EU level, and they are very active participants in that regard. And I look forward to giving a keynote speech tomorrow at the UCD Sutherland School of Law in respect of the rule of law and all of the initiatives that we have in Europe to promote the rule of law on an even-handed basis across the 27 member states of the European Union. Of course, this morning's meeting with the Taoiseach was an opportunity to take stock and reflect on what was a very significant announcement yesterday by President Trump. And as you know, the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has already responded on behalf of the European Commission. And she makes the point, quite rightly, that what has been announced in terms of the imposition of universal tariffs is a major blow to the world economy. It creates a deepened level of uncertainty, and where you have uncertainty, you only have losers. When it comes to the impact on businesses, on workers and indeed on consumers, there are very real issues that arise from the unilateral imposition of tariffs in this way. Ultimately, tariffs result in higher prices for consumers, less trade being done between jurisdictions, and it can lead to the viability of companies coming under threat. And so that is why the response from the European Union will be very carefully calibrated over the period ahead. Our first message is that we are ready to negotiate. There has been engagement between Commissioner Šefčovič, Secretary Lutnick and others over the last number of weeks. And we are now ready to step up those negotiations over the days ahead. The second message is that we will continue to diversify our trade relationships. The EU is a powerhouse in international trade, and more countries around the world are engaging now proactively with the European Union with a view to entering into trading agreements because they see the EU as a very safe, trusted and reliable partner that honours its international commitments when it comes to trade. We also need to strengthen the single market, and we must address the competitiveness challenges that have emerged in recent years. And much of that is within our own gift and within our own control, closing the productivity gap that has arisen between the EU and the US and China, for example. And we have pointers as to what we need to do in the Draghi report, the Letter report, and we have already, in the first 4 months in office, introduced a range of different packages that will make a tangible difference to the competitiveness of the European economy. In relation to the possible impact of the measures announced by President Trump last night, the current provisional estimate is that overall around €380 billion of EU exports will be subject to the additional tariffs. That comprises of approximately €290 billion subject to the so-called reciprocal tariffs, €26 billion subject to US Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminium, and €67 billion subject to US Section 232 tariffs on cars and car parts. This would represent overall around 70% of all EU exports to the US being subject to new tariffs that have been announced yesterday and indeed in recent days, which would result in around €80 billion in additional duties on EU exports to the United States. This relationship between the US and the EU is mutually beneficial. We are each other's most important trade and investment partner. Annual trade stands at around €1.6 trillion per annum. So we need to work together to address the global issues that are there in respect of barriers to entry to certain markets, in relation to overcapacity, in relation to subsidies. But the EU is not the problem. The EU is part of the solution because this mutually beneficial relationship has resulted in millions of jobs being created on both sides of the Atlantic over many, many decades. And we want that good cooperation, that strong relationship, mutually respectful and beneficial to continue. And the final point I want to underline is the importance of unity at an EU level, because acting as a bloc, the fact that trade is a competence of the European Commission in full consultation and agreement, of course, with the Member States, gives us a collective strength that we would not have individually. And our greatest prize is access to the EU single market of 450 million people, the largest and the most important single market in the world. So we are entering into this period of uncertainty and turbulence as an EU from a position of strength. We stand ready to negotiate, but we also stand ready to respond and to defend the interests of European businesses and our Member States in the event that negotiations fail. That is not a scenario that we want to be in, but we will act if required, but our first preference is that we would have negotiations, and we are now ready to enter into meaningful negotiations without delay. Thank you very much.
Joe McGreely from RTE. Taoiseach, you say you want to protect jobs and protect industries here that are already affected by this and will be affected if it's extended to pharma. Is the government minded to make any specific supports available to different sectors if it arises that that would be required? And to the Commissioner, would the EU make something like that available as it has done in the past when crises have hit?
I think it's somewhat early yet to be talking in terms of supports. I think this is not the end of the story. It's not too late for negotiations. I think there is some part of this yet to be determined. I understand that Commissioner Šefčovič will be engaging with the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, in the next number of days, if not tomorrow. So my understanding is we had the announcement last evening. My view is that there will be a period of engagement. So we have to see where this settles. And every crisis is different. So the kind of supports that were in the previous crisis may not apply in this case. I think what we do have to do is, as I said, control the controllables in respect of investment in infrastructure, and at European level, working very hard to double down on the single market. There are still too many barriers within Europe. And I think Ireland has benefited enormously from a good single market. It can be even better. And we're working with others in terms of the Saving and Investment Union to release capital for investment, particularly for our entrepreneurs, small to medium-sized companies. So there's a lot we can do in the interim to improve our own competitiveness. We need to work with speed to enable us to do that, and also then through Enterprise Ireland, through the IDA, to continue to work with the multinational companies, with our own indigenous companies, and really accelerate diversification into different markets. The Commissioner has said, and the Commissioner has said, that potentially a trade deal with India will be closed by the end of the year, potentially, and Indonesia is another country. So a lot of markets out there that we can access and increase exports to.
So at this point in time, Joe, we're doing a comprehensive analysis of what has been announced so that we can evaluate the content, what the possible consequences are for Member States and indeed for the EU as a whole. And I think it's important that we don't react impulsively. This is an extremely serious matter. Yes, we are finalising the first package of countermeasures in response to the tariffs that had been announced on steel, and we are preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and indeed our businesses if negotiations fail. And I think we have a collective responsibility to ensure that if does not come to pass. And we will have the direct engagement again between Maroš Šefčovič and Howard Lutnick tomorrow. We want to see meaningful, substantive negotiations take place quickly, because the EU will need to respond in the event that negotiations fail. We have been preparing for this scenario and many other alternative scenarios in respect of trade for many, many months. So the EU stands ready, but we want to avoid that scenario where tariffs are being introduced against each other, because we know what the consequences are for businesses, for consumers, for countries, for our respective economies and for workers, and that's not a road that any of us should want to go down. But at the same time, where we have to respond, we will respond firmly and proportionately, but in the first instance we should all have a collective effort to see if we can reach